I was standing at my kitchen sink that Tuesday morning, staring out at the pecan tree in my backyard, when that old memory came knocking like a salesman who don't know when to quit. The light was common in soft through the curtains, dust floating in the air like tiny ghosts, and the coffee in my mug had gone cold, but I didn't notice right away. Because all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I heard a boy's voice in my head, clear as if he was standing right behind me. "Cross your heart, June," he said. "Promise you'll remember. Promise you'll still be here." I had not thought about that afternoon in Lord, must have been over 40 years. But there it was, like somebody had rewound an old VHS tape of my life and hit play. Now, you gotta understand something about me. I've raised 3 children, buried 1 husband, survived 1 divorce, and nursed my own mama through a long, slow goodbye. I've got laugh lines that tell whole stories and scars I don't show anybody. I got bills to pay and grandbabies to spoil and arthritis in my left knee that lets me know when the rain's common before the weatherman does. So, when an old childhood promise I'd clean forgotten about came strolling back up into my mind like it paid rent, well, it rattled me more than I wanted to admit. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the fact that my youngest, Lily, had just driven back to Atlanta after spending the weekend with me, and the house had slipped from noisy to hollow in under 10 minutes. Or maybe it was that picture frame on the fridge, crooked by half an inch, holding a faded school photo from 1978. My high school graduation, me grinning too wide in that cheap polyester gown, next to a lanky boy with a chipped front tooth and a cowlick that never behaved. Tommy Lee Harper. You know how some names just sit in your chest like a river rock rounded by time, heavy but smooth, until one day you pick it up and realize your fingers still remember every curve. That's what it was like, standing in that kitchen, saying his name in my head after all those years. Tommy. I wiped my hands on a dish towel like I was nervous and didn't want to admit it to myself, and I walked over to that fridge. The magnet squeaked when I slid the photo free. I had kept that picture there so long it had become part of the wallpaper of my days. Half the time I didn't even see it anymore. Isn't that funny? The things we swear we'll never forget, then let them fade into background noise. And the things we swear we're done with, only to have them show up, bold as ever, when the house gets too quiet. I took that photo to the table and sat down, the chair creaking like an old friend complaining, but still holding you up. Tommy's arm was thrown around my shoulders. His grin was too big for his face. My hair was all feathered out like Farrah Fawcett wannabe, and my eyes were lit up in that way only 18-year-old eyes can be, believing the road ahead is wide open and paved just for them. And suddenly, I was not 61-year-old June with a sore back and a quiet house. I was 11 again, sweaty, barefoot, and furious at the world. It was the summer of 1971, down in our little Georgia town, where the air stuck to your skin like syrup, and the cicadas sang back up for every argument you ever had on a front porch. My daddy had just packed his suitcase and walked out the door, leaving behind a slammed screen, a sobbing wife, and a daughter who decided then and there that promises were just pretty lies you told till somebody better came along. Remember sitting on the curb, rocks digging into the backs of my thighs, picking at a scab on my knee, while my mama cried inside, trying to be quiet about it and failing miserably. I was angry. Not just mad, that deep, burning mad that settles in a child's chest when they don't have words big enough for the hurt. That's when Tommy Harper sat down beside me. Back then, Tommy lived 3 houses down, in the white place with the broken front step, and a mama who worked double shifts at the diner. He always smelled faintly like grease and ivory soap, played together since kindergarten kickball in the vacant lot, hunting lightning bugs in jelly jars, trading baseball cards side by side on the church steps, instead of listening to the sermon. But that day, he seemed quieter. Like even he understood this wasn't the kind of hurt you fixed with a popsicle or a new comic book. "You okay, Junebug?" he asked me. Lord, how long had it been since I'd heard that nickname? My heart gave a little twitch in my chest, remembering it. Back then, I didn't answer. I just shrugged and kept picking at that scab till a thin line of blood appeared, bright against the dirt. Tommy nudged my shoulder with his. "My old man left last year, remember?" he said. I did remember, though we didn't talk about it much. I'd seen his daddy's truck disappear down the street one Sunday afternoon and had never seen it again. "Hurts like hell," he added, looking real serious for a 10-year-old. "We ain't supposed to say hell," I muttered. He smirked. "Well, it does. No other word for it." He kicked a pebble into the gutter, then cleared his throat. "Look, I heard Mama talkin'," he said. "About your daddy leaving," she said. "She said it probably feels like you can't trust nobody now." I stiffened up, because he'd hit the nail right on the head with that one. Tommy's voice got softer. "But you can trust me." Now, if you've ever had your heart cracked open early in life, you know that word trust can feel like sandpaper on raw skin. I snorted. "Everybody says that, then they leave." Tommy shook his head, eyes fierce in that skinny, sunburned face. "I ain't everybody." He stood up real fast, like he'd made up his mind about something, and held out his hand. "Come on," I frowned. "Where? You'll see. Just come on, Junebug." I didn't want to go, but I also didn't want to sit there listening to my mama cry any longer. So I took his hand, small and calloused from helping at the diner, and let him pull me up. He led me down the street to the vacant lot. The grass was high that year, all prickly against our bare legs, and the air buzzed with bugs and heat. In the middle of the lot, standing like it had grown out of pure stubbornness, was that old oak tree, the one we used to climb, even though everybody told us not to. One with the low branch that jutted out just right for sittin', when you needed to feel above everything for a little while. Tommy let go of my hand and scrambled up that tree like it was nothing. "You comin'," he called down. I hesitated, then followed, bark rough under my fingers, heart pounding. We perched there side by side, legs swinging, the whole town stretching out below us, like one of those jigsaw puzzles my mama never had the patience to finish. Tommy cleared his throat again. Always did that before saying something important, even as a grown man, but I didn't know that yet. "Okay," he said. "Here's the deal." He looked me dead in the eye. "I know what it's like when daddies leave. It makes everything feel kinda wobbly." I stared at him, surprised he'd found the right word. That was exactly how it felt, like the world had tilted just enough that you couldn't trust your feet anymore. "So," Tommy went on, "I was thinking, maybe we can make our own promise, when nobody can break except us." Now I was curious, despite myself. "What kind of promise?" he sighed, twisting a bit of bark between his fingers. "Well, Mama says once I'm old enough, we're probably moving to Macon. She wants a better job, better school for me. I know I might have to leave someday. But whether I gotta move or not, I don't want to just disappear on you." He swallowed hard. "So I want to make a deal. When we're grown, like real grown, not just middle school. Let's say 30 we meet back here under this tree." I blinked. 30, that's ancient. He laughed, that easy, lopsided laugh of his. "Yeah, well, someday we'll be ancient. And when we are, we'll come back here. If we both show up, it means I kept my promise and you kept yours. That no matter what happened, we didn't turn into the kind of people who just walk away and forget. Now, when you're 11, 30 is so far away, it might as well be another planet." But there was something about the determination in his voice that made my little broken heart sit up and listen. if one of us doesn't come?" I whispered. Tommy's eyes flicked away for a second, then back. "Then I guess the other one gets their answer, don't they?" Silence settled between us, thick but not unfriendly. The cicadas hummed. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. He held out his pinky. "Cross your heart, Junebug," he said softly. "Promise you'll remember. Promise you'll still be here." I stared at that pinky like it was a lifeline. My daddy's promises were piled up behind the front door in the form of unpaid bills and a half-finished porch swing. But Tommy was sitting right there beside me, eyes bright, hands steady. I hooked my pinky around his. "Fine," I muttered, "but you better not forget." He grinned. "I won't. I swear." We spit in our palms like the stupid little kids we were, shook on it, and carved our initials into the tree bark with his pocket knife. A+T inside a crooked little heart. Not because we were sweethearts, yet we weren't, not then, but because that was the shape he knew how to draw best. And that was that. A childhood promise made on a scorching summer day under an old oak tree. If the story ended right there, it would have been a sweet little memory tied up in a bow. But life, as I learned, don't care one bit about your childhood pinky swears. Years tumbled on. Tommy did move to Macon, like his mama said he would. Wrote letters for a while, messy and misspelled, decorated with doodles. Then middle school swallowed me, and high school distracted me, and there were boys with cars and girls with eyeliner and part-time jobs and school dances. I'd still think of him sometimes when I'd pass the oak tree, when I'd hear somebody say Macon, when a boy would promise to call and never did. But the memory grew fuzzy round the edges, like an old photograph left in the sun. I met my first husband, Mark, my senior. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a smile my mama said she didn't trust, and a truck I definitely did. He liked the way I laughed, he said, like I believed the world could still surprise me. I liked the way he made me feel like the center of the room, even when we were surrounded by people. He proposed fast. Too fast, my mama said, but she also said rent was going up and groceries weren't getting cheaper. She cried at my wedding, and then went home to her quiet house, and I walked into a brand new life in a rented duplex with beige carpets and a leaky sink. I didn't think about that oak tree much at all in those years. I was busy. There were dishes to wash and shifts to cover, and one baby, then another. Mama's health started failing, and the weight of talkin care of everybody settled on my shoulders, the way humidity settles on a July afternoon slowly, then all at once. Every now and then, though, usually late at night when the baby finally slept and the house was still, I'd remember Tommy's voice. "Cross your heart, June, promise you'll still be here." I'd roll over, listen to Mark snoring beside me, and tell myself it was just childish nonsense. Nobody really meets under a tree at 30 like some kind of movie. Real life didn't have that kind of poetry. I turned 30 with a grocery store cake, 2 hyper kids, and a husband who'd forgotten to come home on time. My mama had passed the year before, her last words to me a mix of apology and advice. "Don't let your life be smaller than your heart, baby." I remember blowing out the candles and wishing for I don't even know what. Peace maybe, or just 8 straight hours of sleep. What I did not do was drive across town to that vacant lot. Didn't even cross my mind. The oak tree was still there, sturdy as ever, though the town was already starting to change around it. But I was in a different part of the city by then, and my world had shrunk down to the radius between home, work, school, and the pharmacy. My childhood promise, our promise, was buried under laundry piles and overdue electric bills. So I did not show up, and in my mind, neither did he. The year after I turned 30, I heard Tommy's name again. Was in the produce aisle picking out tomatoes when I ran into an old classmate, Sherry Lynn. She recognized me first, which I always hate, 'cause it means I've aged more than I realized. We chatted the way people do. "How's your mama?" she asked, and I told her, stumbling over past tense. "How many kids you got now? Lord, are these your grandbabies?" Then she said, real casual, "You hear about Tommy Harper?" And just like that, the world narrowed down to her voice and the thump of my heart. I hadn't spoken his name out loud in years, but inside me, it still fit like a familiar song. "What about him?" I asked, trying to sound uninterested, failing miserably. She shrugged. "Back in town for a bit, far as I heard. His mama's sick. Cancer, I think, real bad. He's living with her while she does treatments in Macon, driven back and forth." She reached for a cantaloupe, thumped it thoughtfully. "He was asking about folks, at the high school reunion last year. Said he came late 'cause of the hospital, barely stayed an hour. Asked specially about you, matter of fact." My stomach did a funny little flip. "About me?" "Yeah," she said. "Said something about y'all having a meetup planned years ago that never happened." He laughed it off, but you could tell it stung. It felt like someone had shoved that cold, hard truth right into my grocery cart between the bread and the eggs. I gripped the handle tighter, knuckles white. What do you mean?" I managed. Sherry tilted her head, thinking. "Something about an old tree. His mama told mine he drove out to that vacant lot on his 30th birthday. Said he stood there under that oak for hours, like some kinda lost puppy. Then finally came home looking like his favorite dog had died. The air in the produce section, which had been chilly a moment before, suddenly felt suffocating. I realized I was holding my breath. He said he figured you'd forgotten," she added, a hint of pity in her tone that I hated. "But you know how men are. They pretend it don't hurt. Anyway, I gotta run. These kids'll eat me alive if I don't bring home dinner. Good seeing you, June." And just like that, she was gone, pushing her cart away, leaving me standing there between the tomatoes and the onions, heart hammering in my throat. I went home on autopilot, put the groceries away, yelled at the kids about homework, argued with Mark about money, and cooked dinner I barely tasted. All the while, a younger version of me and Tommy sat in that oak tree at the back of my mind, pinkies locked, promise hanging between us like a lantern. He remembered. On his 30th birthday, he'd gone back to that tree. I had not. That night, when the dishes were done and the kids were in bed, I dug through an old shoebox in my closet. It was full of relics of a girl I barely recognized, concert ticket stubs, folded notes from high school, a dried corsage. At the bottom, yellowed and fragile, were the letters Tommy had sent me from Macon in middle school. I read a few, fingers trembling. His handwriting got neater over time, like he'd grown into himself. He wrote about work and school, about his mama's back pain, about the new city where he felt both excited and lonely. One letter, dated just before his 17th birthday, stopped me cold. "June Bug," he'd written. "I know we don't talk as much now, and that's partly my fault. Life's busy. But I still think about that promise we made. It keeps me going some days, knowing there's somebody out there who remembers who I used to be. If you ever need me, you know where I'll be when we're 30. I hadn't written him back after that one. I don't even remember why. Maybe it was exams. Maybe it was a fight with my mama. Maybe it was Mark, already hovering at the edges of my life, distracting me with his big laugh and bigger dreams. Whatever the reason, I let his letter sit unanswered, and I let our promise sit unattended. Over the years, it slipped further into the back of my mind until it was nothing but a faint echo. He stood under that tree alone. I hadn't even known. Now, in the interest of honesty, I gotta tell you, when I found out he'd come back and I'd failed to show, I felt guilty. But I also felt defensive. I was raising babies. I was holding together a marriage that was already showing cracks. I was working 2 jobs at times, talking my mama to doctor's appointments, trying to be the glue for everybody around me. It was time to chase childhood promises when the electric bill is overdue, and your husband's slamming doors because he ain't got his overtime hours approved. That's what I told myself anyway. I folded the letter carefully, put it back in the box, shoved the box back on the shelf, and I kept moving. Life rolled on as it does. Mark and I eventually divorced, messy, loud, and heartbreaking, in ways I still don't like talking about. My kids grew up, each carrying their own version of that divorce in their pockets like a stone. I went back to school part-time, became a nurse's aide, then worked my way up to LPN. I dated a little here and there. There was a kind mechanic who drank too much, a shy accountant who needed more quiet than my family could ever offer, a teacher who treated me like a project to fix. None of them stuck. Somewhere in there, I heard Tommy's mama had passed. Someone mentioned he'd moved out of state, maybe Tennessee, maybe Carolina. The details were fuzzy, like everything else to do with him by then. I remarried in my 40s to a gentle widower named Carl, who loved my children like they were his, and taught me the difference between Bane needed and Bane cherished. We had 12 good years together before his heart gave out on a rainy November night, sitting in his recliner with the TV remote still in his hand. I held his hand as the paramedics worked on him, and all I could think was how grateful I was that I'd said yes to him when I did, that I'd let myself love again, even after the first marriage had left me brittle. After Carl, I decided I was done with romantic love. I poured my heart into my grandkids, my church, my little garden out back. And most days, that was enough. Till that Tuesday morning, standing at the sink with cold coffee and warm sunlight and that old photo in my hand. Until that boy's voice floated up from the deep well of my memory. Cross your heart, June, promise you'll remember. Promise you'll still be here. It had been over 30 years since that missed appointment under the oak tree. Tommy would have turned 60 the fall before, if he was still alive. The thought stopped me cold. I realized, with a start, that I had no idea. I didn't know if he'd married, had kids, gotten sick, found God, lost hope. I didn't know anything about the man who'd once sat beside me in a tree and offered me the first real sense of security I'd felt after my daddy left. And there, my loves, is where this story really begins, because that's when I felt it. A nudge. Not a literal push, mind you, but that inner tug I've come to recognize as something between intuition, regret, and maybe a little whisper from the Almighty. I set the photo down and said out loud to the empty kitchen, all right, I hear ya." My voice sounded strange, too bright in the quiet. I cleared my throat and laughed at myself, but my hands were shaking just enough to betray me. Maybe it was silly, maybe it was sentimental, but I suddenly knew, clear as I know sweet tea from unsweet, that I needed to go see that tree. Not tomorrow, not sometime when it's convenient. Soon. The next Saturday, I put on my good walking shoes, grabbed my keys, and told Lily on the phone, "I'm talking a little drive down memory lane, baby. Don't worry if I don't answer for a bit." She laughed, thinking I meant a thrift store or the old mall. If she'd known where I was really going, she probably would have insisted on coming along. But this felt like something I needed to do alone. The town had changed, of course. Where mom and pop shops used to be, there were strip malls and chain pharmacies. The diner where Tommy's mama worked was now a nail salon and a payday loan place, sitting side by side like some kind of commentary on modern life. But some things were stubborn. The streets still curved the same way. The sunlight still fell just right on that old stretch of houses near where I grew up. I drove slow, heart thumping, afraid, and hopeful in equal measure. When I turned onto the road with the vacant lot, my breath caught. The lot was smaller than I remembered. Of course it was. Childhood makes everything bigger: the monsters under the bed, the distance to the store, the tragedies, and the joys. But the oak tree was still there. Older, thicker trunk, wider branches, some bark missing where kids had probably carved their own names over the years. I parked crooked, didn't even care, and walked up to it, my knees complaining with every step. Up close, the tree seemed to recognize me. Now I know that sounds crazy, but that's how it felt. There was something familiar in the way the branches spread, in the roughness of the bark under my fingers. I reached out, tracing absent patterns, until I found it. J+T, our initials were faded, half covered by new scars, but they were there. Still holding hands inside that crooked little heart, decades later. That's when I cried. Not the delicate movie tears, but the ugly kind that make your shoulders shake and your nose run. I cried for the girl who'd sat there with a broken heart and let a boy's promise stitch her back together, even just a little. I cried for the young woman who'd been too busy surviving to remember the pieces of herself she'd left scattered in old letters and forgotten meeting places. I cried for Tommy standing under this tree at 30, maybe in a cheap work shirt and scuffed boots, waiting for a friend who never came. "I'm sorry," I whispered, palm pressed to the bark. "I'm so sorry." The wind picked up, rustling through the leaves like someone was sighing overhead. I half expected that lanky boy to drop down from a branch with sawdust in his hair, grinning like he always had. But of course he didn't. The past don't run backwards, no matter how much we beg it to. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for the sun to shift, for my tears to dry, for a sense of quiet to settle into my bones. Eventually, practicality nudged me. I'm a woman used to fixing things: broken zippers, broken hearts, broken schedules. Once the first wave of emotion passed, my mind started ticking. If Tommy had come back once, maybe he'd come back again. Or maybe he never left. Maybe he lived right here in town, and I'd been passing him in the cereal aisle for years without knowing. The not knowing suddenly felt unbearable. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over the screen. At my age, Google searches still feel like something between magic and snooping, but I did it anyway. Thomas Lee Harper, Georgia obituary. Nothing clear. Tommy Harper, Macon mechanic, because I vaguely remembered him saying he liked working with his hands. A couple names popped up, but none that felt like him. I tried social media. I squinted at little profile pictures, wondering if that could be his jawline, if those could be his eyes beneath the gray hair. Finally, I just typed his full name and the name of our hometown. One result caught my eye. Harper Construction and Renovation owner, Thomas L. Harper. I clicked the website, and there he was. Older, of course. Crow's feet at the corners of his eyes, hair more salt than pepper, shoulders broader than the skinny kid I remembered. But it was him. The cowlick was still there, softened but stubborn. The smile in the photo where he stood in front of a remodeled farmhouse was the same, crooked, warm, a little shy. I sat right down at the base of that oak tree, knees popping, and stared at that picture. According to the website, his business was based 2 towns over. They did restorations, especially on old homes. He specialized in bringing forgotten places back to life, the tagline said. If that wasn't poetic justice, I don't know what is. There was a number at the bottom of the page. My thumb hovered over it like it weighed 10 pounds. What do you even say to someone you stood up 30 years late? In the end, I did what I always do when I'm scared. I talked to my mama. even though she's been gone for years. "All right, Mama," I murmured, looking up at the patch of sky framed by the oak branches. "If you're listening, just give me a little nudge if this is a terrible idea." The wind blew again, but no branch fell on my head, so I figured I had her blessing. I hit the call button. The phone rang 3 times. Each ring felt like a heartbeat. On the 4th, a man's voice answered, smooth and deep with a hint of gravel. "Harper Construction, Tommy speaking." For a second, I couldn't breathe. Time folded in on itself. I was a kid again, sitting in that tree, sweat on my neck, hope in my chest. "Hello, you there?" he said. I cleared my throat. "Yeah, I'm here, sorry. Hi, Tommy." There was a brief pause. I could hear a radio playing faintly in the background, a hammer hitting something, somebody laughing. "Who's this?" he asked. Polite, distant. The way you talk to customers and telemarketers. Lord, I almost hung up. Shame flooded me from my ears to my toes. What was I doing? I was a grown woman, sitting under a tree calling up an old childhood friend like I was in some sappy Hallmark movie. But then I remembered that lonely boy standing here at 30, waiting. I owed him at least my honesty. "It's June," I said. "June Carter, from Maple Street. We used to climb trees together." Silence. Then a sound I couldn't quite place, like someone had just been punched in the gut, gently. "June bug," he said, voice suddenly soft and bewildered. "Let me tell you, there are very few people left in this world who can call me that without getting an earful." But when he said it, something uncurled in my chest. "Yeah," I managed, my laugh calming out shaky. "It's me." Another pause, this one full and strange and warm. "Well, I'll be," he said finally. "Either I've hit my head on a beam, or you just dragged me 30 years back in time." His accent was the same, though rougher around the edges. I realized I was smilling. "Probably a little of both," I said. We danced around each other at first, like people do when they're trying not to step on the landmines of the past. He asked how I'd been in that way that really meant, "Why did you disappear?" I told him, cautious, about my kids, my grandkids, my work. He told me about his business, how he'd started it after years of working for other folks, about the satisfaction of talkin', a rotten porch and mackin', "It's safe again." We talked like old neighbors for maybe 10 minutes. And then, inevitable as summer thunder, he said, real quiet, "You know where I am right now?" I swallowed. "I gotta guess," I said. "I'm at our tree," he admitted. "Got a job down the road, passed by, and figured I'd stop for old time's sake. Crazy thing is, I was just thinking about you when the phone rang." If someone wrote that in a novel, I'd say it was too on the nose. But sometimes life really does line up like that, and all you can do is squint at the sky and say, "All right, I see what you're doing here." "I'm here too," I said, "at the tree. On the other side, I guess." I heard his breath hitch. "You're kidding?" "Nope," I said, leaning my back against the trunk, leaving just enough space in case he decided to step around. "Guess we're both 30 years late to our own party." He laughed then. A real laugh, rusty, but genuine. "Well, shoot," he said. "You want to make it 30 years and 10 minutes late and actually say hello proper." My heart tried to climb out of my throat, but my mouth said, "Yeah, I'd like that." I scrambled to my feet, brushing dirt off my jeans like it mattered. On the other side of the tree, I heard footsteps in the grass. And then he was there. Time does strange things to people. It softens some edges, sharpens others. We both stood there for a beat, talking each other in. Hairline had crept back a bit, and there was a faint scar along his jaw I didn't remember. His eyes, though his eyes were exactly the same, brown with little gold flecks, like sunlight on river water. "Hi, June bug," he said, his smile slow and wondering. "Hey, Tommy," I replied. "Guess I'm late." We laughed, but there was a weight beneath it. 30 years worth of weight. He shoved his hands in his pockets, like he always did when he was nervous as a kid. "So," he said, "What happened to you?" There it was, not accusing, not mean, just honest. He deserved the same from me. I took a breath. "Well," I said, "short version, my daddy left, remember? Then later, my husband did too. Except he kept coming back in ways that were worse than leaving. I spent a lot of years trying to hold too many things together with too little glue." I shrugged, feeling foolish and brave all at once. "I forgot about this," I admitted, patting the tree. "About us. Not cause it didn't matter. Just cause I got so busy just surviving that I let the parts of me that remembered get buried." His face softened. "June," he said, "I didn't call you to make you feel bad." "I know," I said quickly. "This is me macking myself feel bad. You just happened to be standing there." He chuckled. He leaned back against the tree beside me, not quite touching, but close enough that I could feel his warmth. "You want to know my version?" he asked. "Always," I said. He folded his arms, looking out over the lot. "Well, when I turned 30, I just started at that big factory in Macon. Mama was struggling, bills were stacking up, and I had this crazy idea that showing up under a tree would magically fix something in my life." He glanced at me, smiling wryly. "Real mature, huh?" "Sounds familiar," I murmured. "So I drove down," he continued. "Stood right here in my only decent shirt, feeling like a fool and a kid at the same time. Waited for about 3 hours. Couple kids came by, thought I was a creeper, I'm sure." He shook his head, laughing at the memory. "When you didn't show, I told myself it was no big deal, that you'd forgotten, that it was just childhood nonsense anyway. But I'll be honest, Junebug, it hurt. Not cause I thought you owed me romance or some grand gesture, just cause you were the only person who'd ever made me a promise and seemed like you meant it at the time." The shame in my chest twisted. "I did mean it," I said quietly. "I just lost the thread. I'm sorry. You waited here, and I was probably fighting with my husband about who forgot the milk." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Life happens," he said simply. "Besides, if you'd shown then, maybe we'd have ruined each other." I snorted. "Thanks for the vote of confidence." He grinned. "I just mean you were in the middle of your own storm. I was in mine. Two people drowning ain't exactly in a good position to save each other." We fell quiet. The years hung between us like laundry on a line, ordinary, tangled, full of stains you can't quite scrub out. Finally, I sighed. "Well, I'm here now," I said. 30 years late, and probably 10 pounds heavier than I was supposed to be. "What do we do with that?" He smiled slow. "We sit," he said, "like we used to." He patted the ground, and I eased myself down beside him. We leaned against the tree, our shoulders finally touching, light and tentative. "Tell me everything," he said, "or at least the parts you're ready to tell." So I did. Not all at once, not the deepest wounds, not yet. But I told him about my kids, one by one. About my mama's last days, and the way she'd squeeze my hand like she was trying to pass something invisible to me. About Mark, and the way he'd alternated between loving me loud and hurting me quiet. About Carl and the gentle, steady love I'd found too late and just in time. He listened, really listened, the way only someone who's had their own corners of loneliness can. Then he told me his story. Turns out, Tommy'd married young too. A girl named Denise with big hair and bigger dreams. They'd run off together, shared a tiny apartment, ate ramen for months. He worked construction. She worked nights at the hospital. They lost a baby in the middle of all that something I felt in my bones more than he could ever know. Denise grew quiet. He didn't know how to reach her. They held hands at the funeral, but let go somewhere after. "It was like living with a ghost," he said softly. "Except sometimes the ghost would look at you like you were the one who died." Eventually, she left. He woke up one morning to a note on the kitchen table and a closet half empty. "I guess we both know a thing or two about leaving, and Bane left," he said, eyes on a distant point. He'd thrown himself into work after that, built other people's dream houses while sleeping on a mattress on the floor. Started his own company, slowly, carefully. Hired a couple of guys who needed second chances. His mama got sick a few years later. Cancer, just like Sherry told me. He'd moved back to town to take care of her, driven back and forth to Macon for treatments, exactly like she said. She'd died in his arms one quiet Wednesday at dawn. I remember looking at the oak through the hospital window, he murmured. Well, not this one, obviously, but some trees. And thinking how they just keep standing there while people come and go underneath him. We talked until the light shifted from gold to softer blue. My back ached, but my heart felt strangely loose, like someone had untied a knot I'd gotten used to living with. At some point, our hands found each other's, fingers lasting naturally, like they remembered the path even if our minds didn't. I glanced down at our joined hands, then up at him. So, I said, keeping my tone light even though everything in me felt heavy. What now? He squeezed my hand gently. Now, he said, we don't make any more promises we ain't ready to keep. We met for coffee the next week, then dinner, then groceries. It was domestic and unspectacular, and perfect in a way I didn't know I could still have at my age. We didn't rush into romance, we kinda backed into it. One day, he was a long-lost friend I'd wronged. The next, he was the person I texted pictures of ridiculous items at the store. Do we need this? Somewhere along the line, you became we, and neither of us bothered to mark the exact moment. My kids were cautiously curious when I mentioned him. My oldest, Sarah, squinted at me over Sunday lunch and said, "So this was like your childhood sweetheart?" I shook my head. No, baby, he was my childhood anchor. Sweetheart came later. She rolled her eyes, but smiled a little. Tommy met them slowly, dinner with Sarah and her husband first, then Lily and her pack of kids. They liked him quicker than they wanted to admit, mostly 'cause he fixed my leaky faucet without being asked, and never once talked over me. We didn't move in together, at least not at first. I liked my little house and my routines. He liked his space and his workshop. Instead, we kept our own places, but wore a path between them, like two old trees whose roots had grown together underground, even if their trunks were separate. Every now and then, on a quiet evening, one of us would bring up that missed meeting at 30. How different you think things would have been if I'd shown up? Asked him once, as we sat on my back porch watching the fireflies. He shrugged. Maybe we'd have married young, had kids, fought about money, drifted apart, found our way back. Or maybe we would have lasted. No way to know. He turned to me, eyes crinkling. But I know this. Back then, I needed you to be proof that not everyone disappears. When you didn't show, I decided I'd have to be that proof for myself. So I built a life where I did the stickin' instead of the leavin'. He nudged my shoulder. Now, at our age, I don't need proof so much as I need company. You give me that, June bug, in spades. I thought about that a long time, about the way we look to other people when we're young to save us from being hurt. How we hand M that responsibility without realizing it's too heavy for anybody to carry forever. I had been that little girl on the curb, waiting for someone to promise not to leave. He'd been that boy under the tree, waiting for someone to prove they meant it. We had both been disappointed in different ways, and yet, somehow, we'd both made it here anyway. Not unscarred, not untouched by regret, but here, now. I'm not going to tell you that everything since then has been a fairy tale. We're both set in our ways. He leaves his boots by the door where I trip on M, and I leave half-empty coffee cups in every room like trail markers. We argue about silly things, the right way to load the dishwasher, the best route to take into town. We've had serious arguments, too, about how much space to give my kids in our decisions. about his fear of Indin, up like his mama, sick and alone. About my fear of opening, my heart wide again, only to have it slammed shut by fate. But there's a steadiness to it all now that I didn't have in my younger years. Maybe because we've already seen how bad the worst can be. Or maybe because common back to that tree, owning our shared past and our separate mistakes, gave us a foundation stronger than any we could have built in our 20s. Sometimes, on anniversaries of little nothings, the day we found each other again, the day he finally told me he loved me in that gruff, almost annoyed way of his, we go back to the oak. It's older still, dropping more branches, bark rougher and patchier. But it stands. Lord, does it stand. We sit under it, our knees complaining, our backs protesting, and we watch the kids from the neighborhood climb its lower branches. They yell and laugh and swear they'll never grow up and leave this street. We share a look, knowing better, and say nothing. Some lessons you gotta learn by leaving. On one of those days, I ran my fingers over our faded initials and thought about promises. How some are meant to be kept exactly, like the ones you make to babies, that you'll feed M, hold M, keep him safe as long as you can. Others are more like seeds thrown into the air. You don't know where they'll land or when they'll sprout, but they do something to the soil of you just by being spoken. That promise we made as kids, cross your heart, promise you'll remember, promise you'll still be here. It didn't play out the way we pictured. We didn't meet at 30, flush with success, ready to fall into each other's arms like the end of a movie. We met at 61, both a little bruised, both a little softer, both a whole lot more honest about how broken the world can be and how beautiful. I forgot the date. I forgot the plan. But my heart remembered something deeper. It remembered the feeling of sittin' beside someone who knew your whole messy story and still chose to show up. It remembered the safety of shared silence, the comfort of a handshake that meant, you're not crazy for hurtin' this much. Even when my mind let the details slip through the cracks, that ache for that kind of connection never left. And when the time was right, messy and late and absolutely imperfect, that old promise rose up, dusted itself off, and came knocking. Sometimes, when one of my daughters calls me in a panic, Mom, he said he'd always be there, and now he's gone. Or, I promised myself I'd never end up back in this situation, and here I am, I tell Em this story. Not because I want to give Em some fairy tale about childhood sweethearts finding each other again, but because I want Em to understand that we are more than the promises other people break. We are even more than the promises we break ourselves. We are the way we get back up. Phone calls we make 30 years late. The apologies we whisper to trees and tombstones and empty rooms. The choice to love again, not because we trust the world to behave, but because we trust ourselves to survive when it doesn't. And I think about that little girl on the curb, knees scraped, heart shattered. If I could sit beside her now, I'd take her hand and tell her this. Baby, you're gonna make promises you can't keep. You're gonna forget some things you swore you'd remember. You're gonna hurt people you love, sometimes by accident, sometimes 'cause you're just too tired to do better that day. And you're gonna be hurt over and over by folks who swore they'd never do it. But you are not the worst thing you forgot. You are not the sum total of all the times you didn't show up. I'd point to that oak tree and to the woman sitting under it, gray hair frizzen in the heat, phone in hand. You are the part of you that picks up the phone anyway, the part that says, I'm sorry. I was late, but I'm here now. If you're willing, can we start again from here? Because that's what home really is in the end. Not the house with the perfect paint color or the mortgage finally paid off. Not the marriage that never once fights or the family that always agrees. Home is the people who, despite all the broken promises and missed meetin' S and slammed doors, keep finding their way back to the porch, who keep sitting in the same dented lawn chairs, side by side, saying, "All right, let's try this again." My house these days isn't fancy. The wallpaper in the hallway is peel-in at the corners, the kitchen cabinets creak, the guest room has mismatched quilts on the bed. But when Tommy walks through that front door, tracking sawdust on my clean floors, my heart does this silly little skip. Not because he's my savior, not because he kept every promise he ever made, but because, after everything, we both chose to come back, to the tree, to ourselves. The pieces of our story we'd left scattered in old letters and half-forgotten corners. So if there's a promise tugging at you, a phone call you've been avoiding, a conversation you've rehearsed 1,000 times but never had, a version of you that you left sitting under some metaphorical tree years ago, maybe this is your nudge. Not to fix everything, not to erase the hurt, but to show up. Late, imperfect, scared, and honest. Sometimes, the promises we think we broke forever are just waiting for us to remember where we left them. Sometimes, the people we think we lost for good are standing on the other side of the same old tree, waiting on a different decade. And sometimes, if we're real lucky and a little bit brave, we get to walk around the trunk, look each other in the eye and say, "Well, look at us. We made it, not on time, but we made it."